Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. So this week I want to focus in on materials and textures, but before that I already noticed something that we can do really quick. You'll notice that from a distance this scene has no shadows, and yet when I go in closer, or when I go to my camera preview, you can see that there are shadows. Uh, this is a trick that Unity does with its default settings to save on frame rate to give you better performance overall. But if you want to play around with the shadows, if you want to actually see shadows from a great distance like this, then very quickly we can just go up to Edit, Project Settings, and let's see. Is it Project Settings or is it Preferences? No, I believe it's Project Settings. Edit, Project Settings, we go down to, here we go, shadow distance, that's what we want. Right now, shadow distance is currently set to 150, so we're not going to be seeing shadows unless we're pretty close to the scene, but we can just bump this up by putting our mouse over shadow distance so we can get these two arrows, or we can just write in a number here. So let's just write in 500, and we can see shadows from a greater distance. I think for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to keep it pretty small just to ensure, ideal frame rate. So let's just, let's go 300. I won't be able to see them from this far away, but as soon as I start getting a little bit closer, I can start seeing some shadows. So I think that's acceptable, and that's a very quick lesson on how to see shadows from a greater distance from greater distances. This week we're going to be focusing in on materials. So the first thing that we should probably do is find some materials, and thankfully I'm using the same scene from the end of the previous week's videos. So I already have some assets I brought in from the asset store, as you may recall, and those assets have materials associated with them. So let's just find those, and we can talk about them a little bit. We can find them and review them. So let's go to our asset store folder. I already went ahead and organized all this stuff out nice and neat, so I can very quickly find my scenes, so I can swap back and forth between different scenes, as so. My prefabs, which we discussed last week, my materials, which is a very basic cube material that I made for a very quick video in week 2. Maya assets, in this case just the troll, and my asset store assets, which we're going to be going over. So let's see. Let's go to our character. See what kind of materials we have associated with our character. We have quite a few. We have this character body. Let me raise this up. There we go. We can control that there in the inspector. We have this character body, character sunglasses. Let's zoom in on our Chevolo guy here. There we go. We have the character body that's been used, the character sunglasses. We have grid box blue. These must be for the demo level, these grid box materials, because they don't seem to be associated with Chevolo at all. And this little orb up here is probably using just the default material. Yeah, it is, as you can see there in the inspector. Excellent. Okay. So materials. Essentially, the materials are what you actually place on your models. We're going to be talking about materials and textures, but it's important to note the difference. Materials are applied to models, whereas textures are applied to materials. So you're never going to be applying a texture, an image that you create or that you find online. You're never going to apply that directly to a model. You're going to apply a texture to a material, and then that material is what is applied to the model itself. So that is the important distinction. Materials applied to models, textures applied to the materials. The Chevolo guy has only 2 that we can see, because again, this little orb up here uses just the basic default material that comes with every single primitive in Unity. So that's nice. We can also review the materials for other stuff, like the Simple Poly City, like the Simple Poly City that is used for these buildings over here. They have materials associated with them. They have a lot of materials associated with them. And by the way, if you want to review the previews of these materials here, you can review them as a sphere. But if you click here, you can review them what they look like on a simple box primitive, what they look like on a cylinder primitive, what they look like on a torus primitive, on plane. Plane is probably the best, especially for things that were created in Photoshop like this, because you can very clearly see all the pieces of this particular material, of this particular texture, I should say, all neatly laid out. And here we are back to the back to the sphere again. So those are just some quick ways to preview your materials before you actually apply them onto anything. Next thing I want to cover is actually finding your materials. So when it comes to asset store materials, when it comes to asset store packages, chances are the owners that created the stuff in the first place have done a pretty good job of actually organizing out where the materials are. As should be your priority, they make a special folder just for the materials, and they make a special folder just for the textures. They make separate folders, one for the materials and one for the textures. We're focusing on materials right now, but keep in mind, they make folders for materials and textures. It's important. It's important to just keep it organized, and in fact, I did that myself with my own with my own folders here. As you saw before, I made a folder for the asset store, one for Maya stuff, one for material stuff, one for prefab stuff, and one for the scenes, so I can go back and forth between my different scenes within my project here. But let's say everything was really disorganized, or you just didn't want to go digging around the folders. What is a fast way to find what you need? To find material specifically? Well, if you go up here to the favorites, you will see that we have a whole bunch of options. The main ones that we want to focus in on are all materials, all models, and all prefab. So we click on all materials, for example. Every single material in the project, doesn't matter which folder they were in originally, they're all just together now in alphabetical order. Very easy for you to just find a material here. Obviously, eventually it gets pretty busy, depending on how many materials you have, but this is just a quick, surefire way to get all of your materials organized in one in one space. You can see the shortcut you can type in up here. You can type in T material, or let's type in T dot model, and we can see every single one of the models here that we got from our asset store packages, as well as my troll that I brought in from week 2. Now, the next thing I want to cover is creating my own materials. But before we do that, I'm noticing up here in the top left from last week that we, plopped down a lot of stuff in our scene, right? But we didn't really go through the trouble of organizing it like I said you should. Like I'm talking all this time about organizing your project panel, but you also have to make sure you're organizing your hierarchy panel as well. So let's actually go ahead and take a second to organize our hierarchy panel here, because we got a lot of stuff here and we want to make sure that this is all, easy to locate. Right now everything's kind of messy, just kind of plopped out in this big list here that's very difficult to make sense of. So let's see. We have all these mountains here, and we have this terrain here. And by the way, all I'm doing right now is just holding down control on my keyboard and selecting things that match up with each other. So we have the mountains, we have the terrain, and I think that's it in terms of walkable areas. So I'm going to go ahead and actually make this a group here, similar to what you would do with the outliner in Maya. I'm going to make this a group just to make it easier for us to see what's what in this big scene. So there's 2 ways to do that. Either we can, scroll down the project panel so we can get some empty space here in the hierarchy panel. Just right-click and go to Create Empty. That creates an empty game object. We'll discuss game objects in a second. Or we can just, if you find that your list is too messy, like mine is, you can just go up to Game Object and just go Create Empty. Same thing, Game Object. So a game object is a blank, invisible, nothing object. The only information it has is a transform location. We can go ahead and just, for the sake of organization, we can reset this so that it is at 000, 000, and 111. It's not an actual object. If we try to focus in on it, it's just this. It's just invisible. There's nothing there. There's no primitive information. There is no nothing information there. This game object can be whatever we want it to be. And in this case, I want this game object to be my terrain. So I'm going to select all the things that make up my terrain. In this case, all the mountains that we can walk on, as well as this terrain grass, as it's called. And I'm just going to drag and just going to put them in the game object. And now my game object I can rename as terrain. There we go. And now it's renamed terrain, and now this once invisible game object now is just all of my terrain. I can control all of my terrain at once. I can just rotate. I can rotate it all together. I can do all the things you'd expect to do with a group of objects selected. I can scale it all together. I can move it. I can... What else can I do? What I can do, and what I should do, is actually get everything out of this particular game object, because I want to create a brand new game object instead. Or I want to refocus the center of my invisible object here to a better position so that when I scale and rotate, I have better control over where it goes. So I'm going to put it somewhat in the center here. This makes more sense. And now I'm going to take all of my terrain assets again, and I'm going to put them into my terrain game object. And now I have better control with rotating and especially with scaling. So that's more what I want for this. So there we go. That's my terrain. Let's keep organizing. Let's go here. We only have a couple of buildings. So let's make another empty object. And let's call this buildings. And I'm going to take the shoe shop and the residential shop that I plopped in, and I'm just going to put them here in buildings. Great. And that's a good center pivot. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I got no problem with that being the center, though. I could reset and that'll just move everything, but no. Alright, well, no, I'm fine with that being where the center is. Next up, let's get all the trees. So we have another empty object. And now we're going to collect all the trees. So we have this tree, this tree. We can collect them all from the hierarchy, or we can just select them all in the scene itself, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to select all the big trees first, because those are very easy to find. And now I'm going to drag these into my game object, and I'm going to call this one big trees. Very nice. And now I'm going to track down the little trees, which should be easier because my hierarchy is now a lot smaller. And fir trees, there's another one. Are there any more that I want to collect? Yes, plenty more right down here. And I'm going to right click, I'm going to create an empty. Oh, I need to collect them again. Fir tree variant, 1, 2, 3, 4, not the ambulance, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're going to put this in there, and we're going to call this game object little trees. And next, I'm going to take these antennas. I would just collect them from the scene, because they're very easy to see in the scene. There we go. And again, need to create another empty. And again, need to collect them all. Always remember to create your empty object first before you actually, before selecting everything in your hierarchy or your scene. Okay, so now I'm going to call this antenna. And finally, we just have ambulance. So let's go ahead and I'm going to call this last one cars. And I'm going to select all the ambulances. I'm going to put them in there. And finally, now that we have all of this cleaned up, I am going to, one more time, create one more empty object. I'm going to call this environment. And I'm going to put all of these other game objects in there just to really clean it up and really give us some nice nesting here and some nice control. And that makes sense. We can move the buildings down here. Trees up there. And there we go. That is an example of how to do some basic organization within your hierarchy as opposed to just in your project panel. So not only can we gain control and organization within our project panel, but we can do the same with our hierarchy, as you see here. All right, our organization out of the way. Let's go back to materials. Specifically, let's actually zoom in towards Chevolo Guy, where the scene begins. And let's actually just create some primitives of our own real quick. Again, we can do that by going up to Game Object. We can go to 3D Object. We can just create a quick cube right around here is fine. We can make it pretty big. I don't mind. Scaling it out. Yeah, that's a good spot. We can maybe rotate a little bit. That's okay. Let's create a plane. That, why not? And then let's create a sphere. Why not? And this one we can keep pretty small. We can put that over here. Okay. So, as discussed before, Unity already assigns a material to any basic primitives that it creates. It's a very basic default material. It's just a standard white color. But we can very, very easily replace this with different materials just by going to, in this case, let's make it easy for ourselves and go to all materials, as we discussed before. And let's pick some of these random materials that were provided to us by the asset store and just see what happens. Let's see. Nature's props. Let's apply this building to the cube. That's pretty cool. Looks like it even makes some degree of sense a little bit, at least in some directions. Let's apply this to the plane, and let's apply one of those test materials at the demo level on the sphere. And let's zoom in to make sure it's actually, yeah. Very nice. All right. That's how you apply materials, and you can very easily override that by just taking in different materials and just applying those. And it'll just, Unity will just replace the previous material with the one you're applying, so you can just infinitely, you know, swap whatever you want with whatever else you want to create whatever kind of material you're looking for. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and keep this. Very simple, very, very, very easy to apply a material within Unity. You'll notice so far we haven't created our own textures yet. We're just playing around with what's been provided to us. In this case, Unity doesn't have the power to create textures, i.e. the actual image information, like the kind of information you would use to detail a vehicle or a building or anything like that. But it does give us the power to make materials, the things that we apply directly to the models. The textures we have to make elsewhere, but the materials we can make directly in Unity, and that's a very simple process, as you may recall. I'm going to go back to my assets folder. I'm going to go to my own materials. I already made one before, but let's make another one. It's very simple. We just go to create. We go to material, and there we go. There's our material. I'm going to call this test underscore mat, because that's how I like to organize my materials, with the underscore mat. Next up, we can start playing around with these settings. So, as discussed before, albedo is essentially the base color of a material. So with this, we can change around what the color of the material is going to be. We can see in the preview what it's actually going to look like. Let's make this blue. I like blue. We can make this very bright or dark. We can lose the saturation, make it very saturated. I like kind of something bright like this. So let's just go right around here, I think. That makes sense. Metallic, we can make something shiny, metallic. Let's actually go ahead and apply this to the sphere here. There we go. And let's go back to our inspector, to metallic, test, yeah. We start losing some of that color information around the edges when we really boost up the metallic there. Let's put it around there. And the smoothness, we lose the color information in the middle there. Smoothness equates to roughness, and roughness, the higher the roughness is, the more reflective a surface is going to be. And the lower the roughness is, the less reflective a surface is going to be. We can make it shiny, I don't mind. Next up, we have these boxes for normal maps and height maps and occlusions and detail masks and tiling. Tiling is going to be important when we're actually dealing with texture information. For now, we can't really do much with this. I mean, we can, but it's not going to do anything because we don't have any actual image information that's plastered on top of the material. We just have the basic colors. So there isn't anything we can do with that. Secondary maps we don't really deal with, at least not right now. And finally, we can talk about the shader itself. There's multiple different kinds of shaders. The main ones you're going to probably be using are the standard one and Autodesk Interactive. Autodesk Interactive is very useful, especially for roughness. As you can see, roughness is the opposite of smoothness, so the higher the roughness, the less reflective a surface is, and the lower the roughness, the more reflective a surface is. And that's going to be important, especially when we're creating our own textures in other programs. So keep in mind that in other programs, you're usually going to be dealing with the smoothness that's in shader. You're going to be referring to that as roughness, and roughness, essentially, the lower it is, the more reflective a surface is, and the higher it is, the less reflective the surface is. We can go ahead and actually play the scene right now real quick, because there's one last thing I want to show you about basic primitives. Shivolo falls to the ground. All basic primitives come with their own colliders, is the one thing I wanted to make sure I showed you. You can see, if we actually exit the game real quick and select the sphere here, and then the plane and the building, that every single basic primitive that Unity creates, they all come with their own colliders, their own appropriate colliders. So that is just something else I wanted to show you and make sure that that was discussed at some point. I think I'm going to end the video here. So far, we've only been discussing materials, but next time, in the next video, I want to discuss textures, i.e. the image information that you can paste onto a material. So until then, I hope you enjoyed. I hope this helped a little bit. We went over quite a few different things. The shadow distance thing, organizing your hierarchy, and then getting into some material stuff. Next time, we're going to be going deeper into material stuff by discussing textures. So I'll see you then.